Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second session of COMA UK's Shared Transport Conference 2022. My name is Matthew Clark. I am Associate Director at Steer. I lead our work in new mobility, and I'm also the chair of COMA UK. So very pleased to welcome you to this session, which is entitled Welcome to the Smorgasbord, Different Mobility Hub Types in Action. And very pleased to thank all of our sponsors who are helping to support this work today. So many of you will be familiar with the concept of mobility hubs. So I'm not going to start this session with a description of what a mobility hub is, and I'm not going to put on screen a shot of a mobility hub visualization, as I'm sure many of you have seen those before. Instead, I want to introduce mobility hubs as the socialites of the shared mobility world. Why is this? So a well-designed mobility hub wants to bring people together. It wants to get people to try as many different transport modes and services. A mobility hub wants you to try something new. In this case, not tempting you to a glass of cheese or wine, but to tempt you out of your private car. Mobility hubs should be the kitchen of the party, where people want to be. In the UK, we've seen an increasing interest in mobility hubs, spaces to socialise and normalise more sustainable mobility. Personally, I've worked on projects in Fife in Scotland, Yorkshire, Hampshire, London and Plymouth to date. But moving on from this first session today, I think we really need to think about how we introduce things at scale. Today, we have a range of speakers who will talk about their experience developing and implementing mobility hubs, and I'll introduce them in turn. There'll then be a chance to ask questions, so please feel free to add these in the chat, and I'll facilitate these being asked after the presentations. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce Gustav Bozhans, who's a research associate at Newcastle University. He's going to talk through the core findings of the eHubs project, with particular regard to potential target groups for use of the eHubs, the appeal of different shared electric vehicle types, and their potential to substitute trips by the private car. Gustav, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm afraid my camera is not working due to a technical issue, so I'm afraid we'll have to do without. Today I will be talking about the eHubs project. I'm a research associate at Newcastle University, and I've been working at the eHubs project for the past 3+ years. And the project lead from our side is Dr. Dylan Disanayake, I think, who might also be among the participants today, and a few others who have joined our team in the past few years. Now the project has officially come to close this year. It's an Interact funded project, but it is still continuing via a capitalization call into next year. In the eHubs project, we had 7 pilot cities that were testing mobility hubs, 3 of them from the Netherlands, including Arnhem, Nijmegen and Amsterdam, 1 partner from the UK, which is Manchester, and also cities in Germany, Belgium and France. We had quite a different array of partners, so ranging from academic to policy analysis and shared mobility providers. In terms of providers, we had Carguru, who's an e-cargo bike provider, Dale Fields and Urbi, who are distributing shared e-bikes, and MobiPoint, who are mostly focused on electric cars. In terms of the project, so while the official project has ended, the project is still continuing in terms of the capitalization call, which is adding new regions to the eHubs project, and those include Dublin in Ireland, Inverness in Scotland, and Wallonia in Belgium. So the project will still be continuing until September next year. Now, you've probably have heard various definitions of mobility hubs in the day. The definition that we adopted is that a shared mobility hub should have at least 2 different shared electric vehicle types on offer. The vehicles don't have to be electric. They could be conventional bicycles as well, for instance. But in our case, we were focusing on electric mobility, so any combination of, for instance, shared e-bikes, cargo bikes, cars, and or e-scooters. Just to give you an example, this is a mobility hub in a refurbished military complex just in the center of Amsterdam. On the left-hand side, you can see a few shared e-bikes with charging stations. On the right-hand side, there are some more charging points for private bicycles. Just at the opposite of this structure, there's an electric vehicle charging point. You can see the smaller vehicle on the left is one of the shared vehicles that are accessible via the hub, while the vehicle on the right is just a private vehicle who's also using that charging point. Just to give you a few more details, one thing that is interesting is there were also some scooters parked at the mobility hub, but it's noteworthy to say that those scooters are not officially they're not a part of e-hubs, just people intuitively left the scooters there because they recognized this hub structure as kind of an established structure and just intuitively left the vehicles there as well. And of course, there was signposting around the hub as well, explaining what e-hubs are and how you can use them. Now, but what I want to talk to you about today is some of the research that we have been doing for the eHubs project. First, I would like to draw your attention to some research that we have conducted on identifying potential target groups for eHubs, so who might be interested in using mobility hubs. Secondly, I would like to show you some research about the different modes that can be available at mobility hubs and whether or not they appeal to different user groups. And finally, I also want to touch on the topic of mode substitution, so answering the question that many of us are interested in, whether shared mobility can help to reduce private car use. Now, regarding the first point, there's a paper that we published just about a year ago. And in this paper, we aimed to identify potential early and late adopters of mobility hubs. Essentially, what we found is, so we conducted this study in Amsterdam and then replicated it in Manchester. The first cluster that we found was quite interested in mobility hubs were actually car-dependent families, and they represented no less than 69% of the sample that we had at the time. And they expressed a great interest in e-bikes, but also electric cars. Then the second biggest cluster were what we call the multimodal mass-ready users. So those are usually what maybe the stereotypical shared mobility users, or younger people who are usually already traveling quite actively and in a multimodal way. So usually they're all already cycling, using public transport, walking. So obviously they are quite drawn to mobility hubs and do not need a lot of convincing to use them. The final two clusters that we found were composed more of older respondents. We had one cluster which we called the anti-mass individuals, because they had a really negative attitude towards shared mobility in general and were quite happy with the way they're already traveling. So a lot of them were, for instance, older women who are driving, and they had no intention whatsoever to switch to shared mobility. And finally, one very small cluster that we found is what we labeled the cautious captives. So they also tend to be older people and are maybe somewhat somewhat limited in the mobility options. So they might be experiencing some degree of mode captivity, and they are skeptical towards shared mobility, but they are actually the ones who might benefit from the offer that is available, for instance, via shared mobility hubs. So this is all I wanted to show you about the target groups. Regarding the second point, so you also wanted to know, well, is there any benefit of having a selection of vehicle types at a mobility hub, or is there no advantage compared to monomodal sharing schemes? So we conducted a survey and asked people about their intention to use various types of shared electric vehicles. And one thing that we found is that across all shared modes, younger people and those who hold a positive attitude towards shared mobility express a greater interest to use shared modes, regardless whether it's in shared e-bike, e-scooter, or e-cart. We also found that cyclists and public transport users in particular expressed a greater interest in using e-bikes, e-cargo-bikes, and e-scooters, but not e-cars. This is, I think, an interesting finding because it shows that we do not need to expect any mode shift from already sustainable modes to shared cars. So although there might be some shifts, for instance, from public transport to e-bikes. Finally, we also found that those who drive regularly, so in this case, this was 1 to 2 days per week, they tend to express an interest in shared electric cars, but they didn't express any interest in any other shared modes. So this indicates or sheds some doubt on the potential of any cross-mode shift, so from the private car to other more sustainable modes. Finally, connecting to the last point, one of the big questions that we have as well, does shared mobility, whether it's via hubs or other schemes, can it help to reduce car use? As part of the project, we had one survey where we surveyed shared mobility users. So those could be people using mobility hubs, but could also be other schemes. And in this survey, we asked people to recall the last trip that they made using shared mobility. We asked them what mode they used on the occasion and also what mode they would have used if shared mobility had not an option, so to estimate the modal shift. And what's interesting in this table is the last column, because it shows us how many percent of each trip was substituted by a certain mode. For instance, if we focus on this row, you can see that of all the trips of the surveyed users, 26% of users substituted a trip that they would otherwise have made by the private car. A similar figure, 26% substituted a trip by public transport, and a similar proportion, 25%, substituted either walking or cycling. I think the key message here is that shared mobility does have some potential to reduce some trips by private car, but it is also replacing other modes, which could be either active travel or public transport. Just to summarize what I've presented today. So first of all, I think one of the key messages is that if carbon reduction is the goal, then car-dependent young families are one of the key target groups, so maybe more in the suburban areas. We also found that different shared electric modes appeal to different demographic and transport mode user groups. And finally, we also found some evidence that shared modes may be just as likely to replace cycling and public transport as the private car. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've found one or the other interesting detail. And please, if you're interested in our findings, do also take some time to have a look at our publications. They're all open access, so you don't need any specific requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gustav. I think a 26% reduction in private car use is a good finding on that. So thanks very much. I'm now going to invite Helen Scholes from Co-Cars. She's the marketing manager from Co-Cars, and she's going to talk a little bit about experience in implementing a new mobility hub, amongst other things. So Helen, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Just making sure I've got my text set up. Hopefully everybody can see that. Yeah. Okay, so today I'm just going to talk about a number of different projects that we're involved with that have a mobility hub component or are centered around mobility hubs. But first, a little bit about us. So because we do more than one mode of transport, we're sort of evolving our name to co-mobility, so we don't have to keep saying either co-cars or co-bikes, because it ends up being a bit of a mouthful. But we do offer shared electric cars and low emission cars. We do have an electric e-bike network, and a lot of our services are co-located at mobility hubs. So across our network, we have around 50 cars in total, around 200 bikes. and we are based in the southwest. So our main centre of operations is in Exeter, where we have our biggest network, but you can also find us in Cornwall, in Plymouth, and Salisbury, and new locations coming online, for example, in Taunton, and we are growing all the time, which is fantastic. So we work with a wide range of partners. These include, as you'd imagine, local authorities, transport operators, educational institutions such as the University of Exeter, national health organisations, EV charging providers, business organisations, organisations such as Exeter Science Park, housing developers, and retailers such as Aldi, IKEA and Lidl. So we've got quite a broad spectrum of clients, and what we're always looking to do is find out different ways that we can connect up locations and create this environment that actually makes space for people and enables them to travel as easily as possible from using one mode of transport to another, whether that's our own services or then switching to public transport modes or other active travel modes as well. So in terms of our impact, there's been a lot going on with us, which is fantastic. Bear with me a second, there we go. So we've removed around 200 private cars. So we're slightly lower. I know sort of within London, you're looking at around 18 or 19 cars per shared car. Where you've got a less dense population, that drops to around 8.5 cars per shared car, which is still great. Our members last year drove over 500,000 miles. And I think what's been really exciting is to see how our e-bike network has developed. So we relaunched our e-bike network in Exeter in autumn 2019. And as you can imagine, with everything that happened in 2020 onwards, it means we've not really had an opportunity to have a sort of a baseline of data to see what's going on. So I'd say this year is probably the first year of something where we can really see normal operation. And what we're seeing now, as you can see from the stats, is we've got thousands of trips taking place every week. We've had 150,000 odd trips happening already this year. And from the survey that we've done with our own members, we can see that 54% of those trips would have otherwise been done by private car. Now that roughly correlates to the research that Como's done among shared e-bike operators as well, that actually there is an opportunity, particularly with e-bikes, to grab a bike within an urban environment and make those kinds of journeys that would actually take longer by car because you're having to deal with city congestion. So what we're seeing more and more is opportunities to co-locate our services at mobility hubs. So I was going to quickly look at 3 different examples. The first one of these is at a residential development. I'm delighted to say this is Seabrook Orchards, which is just outside the centre of Exeter. And we have just been awarded a gold accreditation from Como for this mobility hub. I believe it's only the second that's been awarded by Como. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that. This started as a project back in the midst of time in 2008. So when this development was being planned, there was always an aspiration that it would have a strong sustainable transport element. But I guess at the time, mobility hubs weren't really even a twinkle in anybody's eye. So as we got closer to being able to implement our services, there was an element where we were looking at retrofitting into an existing space. Now that can always be a bit of a challenge, particularly when you've got a development where perhaps there's already adequate car parking and behavioural change has been locked in. But we were fortunate through the partners we were working with, through very committed activity through Devon County Council, Blore Homes and Michael Dart, the landowner, we were able to secure location right in the centre of the development. So on the right hand side, just by the bike station, that's the main road that goes through the development. So where our services are located, it's really, really obvious. So we've got a powered e-bike station there. We've got a shared electric car. The other side is public charging. And then literally 1 minute away, you've got dedicated cycle routes and you've got a bus service. So this development is just on the outskirts of a little village called Topsham. Topsham is a fabulous place to visit, but is notoriously crowded when it comes to cars. It's really not somewhere you'd want to drive to. So having a protected cycle lane that runs from this development all the way into the village, I can guarantee you it will take you 3 minutes to get there on an e-bike, and you'd probably be sitting 15 minutes in your car waiting to get there, and then you'd still have to find somewhere to park. Now, this site only opened in June, but as you can see already, we're getting some good stats from this. So I think like any car club operator, you expect with a new location, it's going to take a while for the service to bed in and for people to become aware of your services. But we're already seeing a good level of utilisation on the car. And definitely with the bikes, we're seeing a huge amount of movement with the bikes. So this was go to the next slide, hang on just a second. We've done some analysis looking at the most popular bike destinations, and it's really encouraging to see that the top 3 are all ones that are connecting up to the city centre, to onward transport, and to a place of employment as well. So it's really showing that these bikes are enabling people to actually get places where they live, where they work, where they want to find onward transport solutions. So the next example is train stations. Again, this is generally a retrofit solution. We found, particularly at the moment, train companies are really interested in the potential of first and last mile services, and in particular using our e-bikes. So I've picked Pinho train station because this is a recent example. It's only relaunched last month. This was down to funding through South Western Railways in combination with Devon County Council. There were a package of improvements that were introduced at this train station. So not only do you find our e-bikes there, but you find bike lockers, a shuttle bus service has been introduced. There's a taxi bay as well. But what's been designed out as much as possible is private parking for cars. Now, Pinho's on the eastern side of Exeter, and that's a part of the city where there is an awful lot of development happening at the moment. Not only residential development, but if you hop over the other side of the M5 and you're into East Devon, we've got Exeter Science Park, which is in, I think, phase 2 of about 5 phases. We've got Sky Park, which is a huge business centre where Amazon and Lidl are based. Exeter Airport, which is not only the airport, but also another business park. And then you can just see at the top is Cranbrook, which is the largest new town that's being built within Devon at the moment. And again, that's on about the 2nd phase of about 5 different phases. So by improving these connections at the train station, it's really been the key that helps then start unlocking connections to all these other locations. So for us, our bikes are not only at this station, they're also enabling onward travel to what we're effectively creating a whole eastern network for this side of the city. So we have bikes at Sky Park, we're opening a bike station at the airport, we have bikes at the Science Park, we've got 2 bike stations in Cranbrook, and that's going to develop into its own town network as further phases of Cranbrook are built. So it's just, again, enabling people to access places of employment, residential places, and also the leisure routes. Devon County Council has done a lot of work in terms of improving cycling infrastructure. So there's the E4 cycle route, which connects up that side of the city. And that, again, it gives protected cycleway for people to cycle all the way out to these places of employment, out to Cranbrook, but also back into Exeter city centre again. What you can see from the stats is, we are seeing a tremendous amount of bike trips that are either starting or finishing at train stations. So that's just the number of year-to-date bike trips, and every month we're seeing an increase. So that covers all of our bike stations that are train stations, of which we have a number. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can just see how Pinho fits into the overall network. And this is the development of this idea of a Devon Metro service, where you've got an awful lot of local train stations that connect into the city and provide those transport options, but you need those mobility hub options when you arrive to enable people to make those sustainable onward journeys. So the last example is something that's not launched yet. We're working on at the moment in partnership with Plymouth City Council. This is part of their Transforming Cities Fund funding. It's called Connect Plymouth. And this is looking at introducing a citywide network of mobility hubs. So I think in total, we're looking at around 40. I think one of the great things with this project is before Plymouth City Council even issued tenders around asking mobility partners to put their hat in the ring. They've done a tremendous amount of analysis to understand where these mobility hubs could be and what they could look like, and the sort of services that they could deliver. As you probably know, if you're working in this space, that you can't always deliver everything in one single place. You have to be quite pragmatic about what can happen. In some places, it might be that there's only shared bikes. In other places, it might be that there are cars, bikes, and charging. In other places, it could be just public transport interchanges. So really taking that pragmatic approach and just seeing how you can join up the dots. So this is what we're looking at for Plymouth. It will launch first sites rolling out in March next year. It's not only ourselves, we're working with Wanea, who are providing the charge points, and we're working with Beryl Bikes as well, who are providing e-bike scheme across the city. And actually, just before this presentation, we were on a call starting to plan for the launch, which is really exciting. I think this is a great example of a local authority bringing a number of different partners together and really driving this project forward to deliver a citywide solution is something that will hopefully make a huge amount of difference. So I guess finally, just a few thoughts about how we see these things working. I think there is some fantastic work being done around developing these bespoke hubs that provide all the services you could possibly imagine. But I also think there's an awful lot of easy wins out there. So for example, those integrations with train stations and how those onward travel solutions can be improved is something that in terms of planning and implementation can be done relatively easily. And that leads on to, you know, the old saying, perfection is the enemy of progress. It would be lovely to be able to introduce something that's always shiny and new and amazing, but a few practical interventions and tweaks can really change the profile of different locations and give benefits and enable more trip types. And finally, none of this could be done without partnership working. You know, we really pride ourselves on working in collaboration with partners across different areas. And that enables us to really understand what people want and need and how we can help deliver it. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Helen. Great to see some examples of things in place and great to see the great demand you're getting there. So thanks very much. Okay, next we're going to move on to Amanda Edmondson, who is the Mobility Hubs project manager. Great to see some job titles with Mobility Hubs in them for the Future Transport Zone in the West of England Combined Authority. She's going to talk about the approach that's been adopted in the West of England and then explore a few challenges they found along the way. So Amanda, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Helen. It was a nice trip down memory lane to go back in Exeter for a bit because I was at university there. It's nice to see how it is. Right, I'm just going to try and work out the art of sharing. Bear with me a moment. Can you see my screen?
We can, yeah, it's just coming through with your slides as well.
Got the hopefully just the plain view and not my notes version. So today
sorry, Amanda, that has got your notes, but
oh, does it? Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's try again.
That's great.
That's working now. Okay. Thanks. So today I just wanted to share with you the approach that we've taken at the West of England Combined Authority. So the West of England Combined Authority, for those of you who don't know, covers essentially Bath and Bristol areas, but that's Bristol City Council, South Gloucestershire Council to the north, and then Bath and North Somerset Council areas. We are delivering mobility hubs only in Bristol City Council and South Gloucestershire, due to the way that our original Future Mobility Zones bid was set out. So there is a focus across our programme of increasing opportunities for first and last mile journeys, which are made to existing good public transport networks that we do have already in the kind of the north area. I wanted to share as well a few challenges that we've been facing. I'm not going to lie, there have been many, but I think we're kind of on our way to overcoming most of them. So I'm going to touch briefly on planning permission, retrofitting, governance and resource, and maintaining consistency across the network. Share my next slide. So this slide just really sets out our overall approach. So I have a team of consultants working for me to deliver this. Because it's only really me employed directly by WACA on the Mobility Hubs project. We've split it into 7 stages. So the first stage was defining what a mobility hub is. So really went right back to basics, looked, relied very heavily on the COMA UK guidance to help us kind of inform that. And then from there, we developed our concept and analysis. We've very much based our hubs on the COMA UK typologies to develop our own sort of typologies. We developed our proposal, which includes that was done through a lot of community engagement, we've developed a wayfinding strategy and concept designs. We're now at the tricky stage, is probably not my favorite stage, of procurement and design and development. So they're kind of happening in parallel at the moment. And then hopefully next year we'll be at the point where we will have delivered the hubs and we'll be able to start our operational trials. So hopefully I'll be able to share this video.
A mobility hub is a place where you can access different types of transport, offering you more options for travel. It will also include useful facilities and local information, allowing better use of your time, as well as providing a focal point for our communities and making public places more attractive. We will be trialling mobility hubs in clusters across South Gloucestershire and the north of Bristol, with larger hubs on public transport routes and at key destination points, and smaller local hubs in neighbourhoods, giving more options to connect to public transport. Our trial mobility hubs aim to make it easy and accessible for all of us to connect to our transport networks, with more opportunities to get where you need to go efficiently and sustainably.
I hope you all were able to hear that. So that was just a brief explanation of what we're hoping to achieve through our mobility hubs. So it is that sense of placemaking, as well as bringing together the different transport networks, so it's easy for people to interchange it at one place. This is a little map which just shows the layout of the geographical locations of our hubs. It won't really dwell on this too much, other than to point out that there is a clustering. So we are very interested in how people might make multimodal journeys, where they kind of join at one of the smaller, what we're calling community hubs, and then hook into a campus or corridor hub where they're more likely to find, where they are going to find frequent public transport services, so they'll be able to connect to that network. And monitoring and evaluation is very much going to focus on how, like, whether and how people are making journeys which travel through more than one hub. So that's why we focus on a clustering. I'm sure you've all seen this image before. So we have used Coma UK's guidance very much as a starting point to help us identify site locations, select components, and develop our own design principles. What we have decided to do, because obviously with mobility hubs, it's about bringing together both services and the infrastructure to support those services. Our focus is much more on the infrastructure, but in parallel, we are also delivering a lot of the services as well through other things that are happening at the West of England Combined Authority, such as we're going out to tender on a new micromobility contract soon, and also working with car club operators, etc., to bring those different services on board as well. And one thing that I think is worth really pointing out is the work that we've done on the wayfinding strategy. So we've used, some of our consultants have really developed something that's going to help us kind of put our brand out there. So at the moment, the West of England Combined Authority is a very new organisation. This is really an opportunity for us to get our name out there for people in the area to kind of understand a lot more what we do as an organisation. Just a quick concept drawing. It sort of looks quite familiar to the Coma, similar to the Coma UK ones, but this hopefully illustrates how we're aiming for compactness of components, so that it's really easy for people to transition between modes. And I won't dwell on this one too long, but it basically lists out all the different kinds of components which we will be seeking to procure or obtain by other means, so that you can really see the variety of everything that we're considering. So there's the wayfinding information, the transport components themselves, elements which support the public realm, some non-procured components too, and groundworks as well. So to start on the challenges, first of all has been planning permission. So be very varied opinion on whether planning permission is required for mobility hubs. We know that certain components such as shepherd stands don't require any planning permission, but then particularly the non-transport components, it's not so clear on whether we need planning permission for those, and if we're delivering the hubs as a whole, do we need to apply for permission as a site as a whole, or just those components? The approach that we went down is to talk to the planning officers in each of the local authorities that we're working with, and we also sought independent planning advice through our consultants and our kind of frameworks. And the outcome is that we're seeking planning permission at the moment only for the sites based on private land. So we've got one site at the University of the West of England and one at Southmead Hospital in the north of Bristol. So we're developing applications for those at the moment. For the other sites, we're intending to seek planning permission only for the components that's required for, rather than the sites of the whole sites as a whole. And we will be relying on a lot of those suppliers to support us with that planning permission, because we know from their experience they're already doing this to deliver their products or services elsewhere anyway, so they're better placed to apply for that. A second challenge that we've had is refitting. So in all of beautiful Como UK designs, I think the challenge that we found is we're trying to fit components into places where some of these things are already there, but they might not quite be in the right place, you know, and how do we fit what we want, the components that we want in a mobility hub, in a space that's already being used as a public space, or in some way as a transport interchange, probably to some degree already. So it's really resulted in a lot of discussions around the prioritisation of how public space is used, because if we need to reallocate some of the footway or the carriageway, that starts to become kind of quite political discussion as well. So our approach has always been to use existing bus stops as the starting point, so kind of the central point as a hub, because they're already there, and they normally take up quite a large footprint with space around. But that does assume the bus stop is in the right place, which is not always the case. We've had to tailor the components to the available space, so sometimes there really just isn't space to put all the components that you would like there, but lots of components you can have in like different sizes. So within our procurement specification, you know, each site has got its own specification. And we've been engaging with politicians, leaders, local authority officers, the other landowners and communities to kind of really understand how people want that space to be used, so that we can argue the case for why, if we do want to reallocate, particularly parking, which I'm sure, as you know, is kind of a very political area, like why we want to do that, and the support that we have. And the outcome is that we do have now an optimal set of components for each of our sites based on user need and space available, but there is variation in our hubs across the network. Our third challenge is governance and resource. I'm sure anyone working in or with local authority will understand the pressure that they are under in the shortage of officer that they have at the moment. However, as a combined authority, we work daily with officers in both Bristol City Council and South Gloucestershire Council to get their input on both kind of, you know, developing our proposal and, you know, our vision and objectives. Everything from the beginning, it's been a joint project with those authorities. I think my advice is, you know, build those relationships early, and don't just rely on one single point of contact. Try to make kind of relationships across the authority, work out who's who. It is harder now that everything's on Teams to kind of like understand the structure of other people's organizations, but you definitely can do it, and if it's worth kind of building contacts with a few friendly faces who can help point you in the right direction. We have a monthly steering group which includes all of our constituent authorities. I basically attend every month, and most of my colleagues don't go there as often as me, but because this is, for us in the West of England, the Mobility Hubs is the first project that where we're delivering infrastructure with and for the local community. So it's a bit of a first in general, and it's having to break down or kind of, you know, work out a lot of things which haven't been established yet. One of the best things that we did recently is we've always had a weekly meeting where we worked with the local authority officers joined us, but what we've done more recently is bring on our two other key stakeholders. So that's the University of the West of England and North Bristol Trust with the Southmead Hospital site. They now join those weekly meetings as well, because everyone's really in the same boat, trying to understand what exactly it is that we need to procure, what decisions we need to make, you know, our project agreements, like how are we going to deliver this? And actually having those four organisations on board has not only saved me time, I think it's actually quite kind of motivating for the others to see that everyone's kind of facing, similar but different challenges, and it's kind of, I think, brought the team together to kind of have all those parties sort of meeting more regularly. And I think, the outcome of that is better buy-in, which is happening, and also that we're better able to focus on the key challenges we have. And the final one is consistency across the network. So as I just mentioned, we're working with 4 different landowners. So there's different preferences at each of those, and as well within each of those, where there's several sites, for example, in Bristol and South Gloss, sites are different, different constraints. But we want to ensure that mobility hubs do have a consistent look and feel, so that the users of them recognise when they're at a mobility hub. So we have an agreed vision of objectives and design and delivery principles, which we set up very early in the project with the local authorities. We are flexible to allow for local variation within the overall definition, so that we can accommodate any restraints. And again, our flexibility means that at some sites, for example, at the west of England, we're probably going to do something much bigger and grander, because it very much aligns with their ambitions as well to improve their eastern entrance. So there's a real opportunity for us to try something that we didn't think we would necessarily be able to try at the beginning. The outcomes of this means that we're able to test more. So this is a trial project for us, and hopefully the mobility hubs will stay, but it means we're able to test different ways of delivering models. So with private landowners, with local authorities, deliver at more sites. The outcome is that the delivery is probably more challenging, because we've got 4 different landowners to keep tabs on, but the challenge is definitely interesting. I will finish that.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Very good to hear what's going on in your part of the world. With no further ado, I'm going to move on to Paul Curtis, who is director at Vectos, and Paul's going to talk about mobility hubs as part of new residential and mixed-use developments. Paul, over to you. You're muted, Paul.
Excellent. Zoom's catching me out. Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Great to be here and to speak to you today about our take on mobility hubs. My name's Paul Curtis. I'm a director at Vectos, part of SLR. Vectos being a transport planning consultancy, and we merged with SLR last year, which is a larger global environmental services consultancy. And with mobility hubs, we tend to use the term community concierge, and I'll show you why. So mobility hubs in our line of work, we really are using now as a core component of a wider mobility strategy for strategic residential and mixed-use developments. And that's part of the wider vision and validate approach to transport planning. So we're moving away from predict and provide, and actually designing communities in a way in which we want them to be used, rather than just assuming that there will be perpetual traffic growth. And we also employ the model of avoid, shift, and improve when it comes to our transport planning propositions. The most carbon efficient way, or the best way of reducing carbon from surface transport, is to avoid vehicle trips entirely. So we do advocate strongly developing communities which are strong on placemaking and allowing the community to perform the majority of their daily functions within a short walk or cycle, so within the 15-minute neighborhood principles. And that means having places to work locally and mixed use of amenities. The next step is shifting modes. So again, we need to see facilities such as mobility hubs, which have the shared mobility alternatives on demand, bike share, car share, DRT, etc. And then improve fuels. Then that's the final component in the sort of decarbonisation approach to ensure there are charging points and that fleets are zero emissions at the tailpipe. We, again, in our design of mobility strategies for new developments, we apply the mobility hub hierarchy. So the primary hub having the majority of the facilities, but with many sites being relatively large and with phasing of the housing over a number of years, the secondary and tertiary hubs is also there to connect with the central parts of the development with the more peripheral parts, and to ensure that the alternatives to car use are there for everybody conveniently, no matter where you are in the site. This is just to visualize how we go about it. So the primary hub within the community centre, and then connected through active travel corridors with other parts of the community, or indeed a business park with secondary and tertiary hubs there. So just moving on to the community concierge. So, you know, our vision for mobility hubs is to have this primary hub with the mobility facilities, but also we want it to be the local centre for the community, to enable the 15-minute neighbourhood principles, to have that centre to allow the placemaking, and, you know, to consistently having to drive out of your community in order to perform shopping or schooling or what have you. So yes, we should have all of the on-demand mixed use, on-demand shared mobility services, but the community concierge really is the name for the front of house of the mobility hub. So this would be the primary hub, the community centre, but then we suggest having a front of house travel plan advisor as the concierge, acting as the interface with the community, advising on the mobility options available, being that permanent presence to remind and incentivize and make it as easy as possible to use the shared mobility services, but also acting as the contact with the shared mobility providers and ensuring that the services are operating effectively, the bikes are being redeployed, and what have you. This dedicated space, and we are starting to design these as part of the master planning process, and we are also getting these included within Section 106 agreement. So the commitment going at the planning stage for these committed spaces, not just for the mobility side, but for the community concierge, and importantly with other facilities such as a cafe, and really importantly the co-working area, giving alternatives for people to work, you know, in your community, but just not in your spare room if that's your preference, and also allowing the smoothing of peak flow traffic. If you do actually need to use your car, if you've got a meeting somewhere obscure and you're going to have to drive, then if you have a co-working space on your doorstep, 7 o'clock in the morning. So that's just a little overview of how we approach the mobility hub. I'm just going to multitask as I try and share a different screen. And it's just a very short video, which I hope you're able to see. I don't think there's any music, so don't worry about that. But this is really just showing again the visualization. And we've really seen over the last couple of years, you know, we've been presenting these ideas for quite a long time as part of our master planning vision and the mobility and accessibility vision for new strategic sites. But in the last couple of years, we are really seeing this this acceptance amongst planning authorities, local authorities, developers, that this is the way forward in so many ways, but particularly now with decarbonisation as one of the main objectives, interlinking different policy areas, there is this movement now towards these kind of solutions. And as I say, we've got quite a few applications that are submitted with these kind of solutions in the 106 and equivalents. So we are expectant to hear soon about the results of some of these, and really starting to see these being part of you know, core parts of community centres in the near future. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Paul. Great to see how mobility hubs are fitting into larger developments there. And for our final speaker today, it's Robert Davis, who is Business Development Manager for Trueform, and he's going to talk about promoting the need for good quality infrastructure. So, Robert, over to you, and then we'll come back for some questions. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Sorry, afternoon, everyone. Now it's great to hear from all of today's wonderful speakers and learn about their individual projects. As Matt said, I'm Robert Davis, the Development Manager at Trueform, and I predominantly focus on new mobility. So a little bit of an intro. I'll be speaking a little bit about Trueform and essentially why I'm here today, followed by touching on some of our significant transport mobility hub installations to date. So about Trueform, so we've got a long background and history working with transport authorities, with over 150,000 installations worldwide. And what we do is essentially focus on design, manufacture, and installation of transport mobility infrastructure. What we've gained over that period of time is a clear understanding of what the customer, or the user, wants in terms of infrastructure. So you can see that we've got 125,000 square foot manufacturing facility out of London. We've got significant sector knowledge with over 40 years in the industry, and we are truly cross-industry expertise from transport to digital out of home to retail, etc. Some of our key client base shown here is a broad mix of transport authorities, architects, designers, commercial and technology companies. These are leading companies. We're very privileged to work with these companies. We're working on a number of significant projects to date. Which again, all around transport mobility. So as touched on previously, we design, manufacture and install leading infrastructure with a clear mission to accelerate and equip the world towards sustainable mobility. We collectively work with leading transport consultants, designers and architects in providing the right product for the right place. Acting as a project management team, we work in partnership with suppliers and incumbent providers whilst component sourcing and integrating additional technologies. So you can see there, it is the 5 key stages. We are that one-stop shop. Sorry. Here, based on the typical COMO topology, Trueform have been providing this full range of mobility hub components for many years now. These hubs, whilst being an integral transport mode connection and aiding users to make a clear, sustainable choice, these hubs are essentially and effectively a shop window for the operators, the service providers, the local authorities, the transport departments. It's the first and last touch point. We really must ensure that we use the right quality infrastructure for customers and users again to make sustainable, accessible choices. Some of the items here you can see from electric vehicle charging points to clear wayfinding, branding, signage, to digital totem integration, real-time information displays. These are essential. These are key items in a mobility hub package. Here is a selection of transport mobility hub installations delivered by Trueform over the years, connecting a range of transport modes, from trams to buses, trains, underground, cycle, private vehicle. These are all, I hope you'd agree, that they're aesthetically pleasing structures. There's clear branding, there's identifiable wayfinding, there's real-time information. They're well lit. It ensures a safe environment. basically everything that you'd expect from a mobility hub. Some of the projects I'll just quickly touch on. So we've got top left is Nottingham's part of their Nottingham Express tramway. This connects the tram and the private vehicle. We've then moved on to Paisley on the top row. Again, this is focusing around the bus and the connection between the bus and the train station. There's a parklet installed as part of our work with Innovate UK, and Connected Places Catapult. We are the chosen provider for Connected Places Catapult manufacturer. And then there's a range from Seattle in America as part of the LRT to cycle storage hubs. Now, for some individual sledger projects, this is the Partick Transport Interchange. It's in the West End of Glasgow. The main aim of this hub is that it's a multimodal point to improve transport connections. It connects the rail, the underground, bus, active travel, walking, cycling, and also the private vehicle, the car. It's an award-winning refurbishment at this particular site. We work with renowned architect Austin Smith Lord. It's actually made up of 4 particular components. So you've got one long walkway, covered canopy, and then across the road there's 3 individual pods. They're all fully enclosed. They're all bespoke design. They're safe. They're secure. It has integrated lighting, real-time information, interactive wayfinding, ticket vending, Wi-Fi connectivity, and CCTV. It is almost the pinnacle of an interchange hub. And then lastly, this is almost one of an original one. We actually work with Steer, so Matt may well know this quite well. This is Dundee. So we actually installed this piece in 2007. So it's over 15 years old now. But I hope you'll agree, it's still looking as good as it did back then. It, again, award-winning, sustainable. It has a self-irrigating green roof. It has shock-absorbing glazing to reduce noise. It's the connection between the bus, the private vehicle, and then the station. It's got clear, identifiable wayfinding. We have real-time information. Whilst it may look a little bit dated right now, it was groundbreaking back then. We've got onward travel information in terms of postering. It's again bespoke. There's interactive kiosks, there's ticket vending, and again, it's safe, it's secure, well lit. It's a good quality piece of infrastructure that is built to last, and that's what we're really looking for from these mobility hubs. And that's it, short, hopefully to the point. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rob. I'm going to invite everybody back to the stage. Not everybody, everyone, all the speakers back to the stage. So if you can turn your cameras on, and then I'm going to bring some questions forward. So the first question I'm going to raise is regarding the location of mobility hubs and components, whether it's on the pavement or whether it's on the highway. So there's been a bit of a discussion in the chat as to the benefits of either approach. I wonder if anyone's got experience of sort of in terms of the implementation, as to either implementation or sort of broad thoughts as to whether it's better to kind of incorporate things on the carriageway or in the public realm. Amanda.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to kind of throw in my experience on this. Some of the sites, as I mentioned, kind of very constrained to work within an existing public realm, and our preference as a project team as combined authority is to reallocate, carriageway space or parking space if we can. But our reactions from the local authorities has been mixed on that front, so it's involved kind of political decisions. At some of our sites, so you see Bristol City Council, it was actually them who highlighted that our proposed location for the e-scooter parking should be on the carriageway. We haven't done that yet in the west of England, although we do have an e-scooter trial. But the approach is that going forward, we're going to be starting to put the e-scooter parking in the carriageway. So we've changed the designs to reflect that, so that the Bristol sites will have at least some of the components within the carriageway. In South Gloucestershire, it does depend a little bit on the sites in question, but I guess politically they're not quite in the same place, which is a shame. But hopefully we can lead by example at the sites where we are able to do that and sort of show how it's working.
Thanks, Amanda. Helen.
So we're working with Devon County Council's highways, looking at locations where particularly we can have our bike stations actually taking over a parking space rather than being on the pedestrianised space. So we've got a number of those at the moment. I think we were all slightly apprehensive to see how that would work, but touch wood, so far it's going well. So DCC are putting in planters in place to just delineate the space. We've got toast rack Sheffield stands painted nice bright orange as well to just keep everything tidy. And actually it's working really well. So one particular location, we have currently got a dockless bike station in a parking space, i.e. there's no powered station infrastructure. And that's soon going to be upgraded. There's actually going to be electric car charging and a co-car there as well. So it will in effect become a mobility hub along that particular road. The other thing we're seeing more of as well is local authorities looking at how they can reallocate car park space. So I think, largely driven by the fact that there's a lot of pressure at the moment in terms of budgets and understanding how they can perhaps change usage of car parks alongside net zero ambitions. It's something that we're working on about developing mobility hubs actually sit within a car park footprint, taking out the car park space to a certain degree, providing EV charging, electric cars and e-bikes within those particular environments. So yeah, a lot happening from our point of view at the moment.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think my experience is that there's always a challenge where removing car parking spaces seem to be reducing revenue for the authority, and then you have the budgets versus public policy, and you have to have strong political will and to make that work. I've got a question here about effectively, what we're talking about here is the bringing together of many different components, whether those are mobility components, whether those are additional services. And once it's all in place, you can see how it works. But how do we get to that point? How do we procure those things? As a question from the audience, and I just want to throw it out there, is can we go to one single point where someone can provide everything? Or do we need to build consortiums? Or is it more of a sort of, actually we need to procure each service individually? Any thoughts on that? I might go to Paul, actually, because Paul's been kind of putting this big vision out there. It looks really good, Paul. How do we go from the vision to the deliverable?
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I think the important thing in terms of from the planning perspective is to ensure that the mobility hub is really there from the outset. And we've had success recently, including in section 106, the provision for the mobility hub to be there before any dwellings are occupied. And obviously the challenge is with the phasing. So in this particular case, we're starting off with a temporary hub, which might not be in the same location as the permanent hub once there is more dwellings occupied. So the temporary hub might sort of foresee like a shipping container kind of facility to start with, but to get that written in, we see the hubs as part of the infrastructure, and so you wouldn't expect a development to be launched before the roads are put in, and equally we don't expect that to happen without the shared mobility options to be put in there as well. Also, I think the hierarchy system of hubs is a nice way of being able to grow those facilities as the number of dwellings increases, and adding secondary and tertiary hubs to the mix. In terms of who should provide, I like the co-mobility approach there, because we've got the cars and the bikes all together. There are lots of different models that can be explored, and we speak to shared mobility providers ourselves, and in the planning stages get commitment to to providing the solutions nearer the time. So I think there is a role for, in some cases, more than one. In terms of sort of manning the mobility hubs, we've again in our discussions, we've got interest from sort of local businesses, local charities that would like to be the community concierge, being the front of house. So that brings in another organisation type into the mix, I guess, as well.
Thanks, Paul. I'll go to Helen and then Robert.
Thanks for the nod there, Paul. I mean, obviously we do have the advantage in that we do more than one form of shared mobility. So we kind of see ourselves a bit like the bespoke suit of shared mobility, that we can actually work with a developer or a transport consultant and really understand what would be appropriate for a particular development rather than recommending a one size fits all. We tend to do a deep dive with property developers and consultants to really understand what they're trying to achieve with their development, so we can recommend the most appropriate solution, including things like phasing. Because we have partnerships with charge point providers as well, we can also introduce them if they haven't already selected a charge point provider. So we've got a sort of a seamless ecosystem where we can look at all the different services in totality. But equally in other circumstances, so with Connect Plymouth, this was a bid situation where there were separate bids that went out for the charge point provider, the car club and the e-bike provider. We were successful for the car club component. It was fortuitous that the organisation providing the charge points is somebody we already work with, so there's any relationship. We didn't win the e-bikes, we did go for that, but obviously we understand the model, also being an e-bike operator, that Beryl use, and that really helps them trying to think about the whole system, how it all fits together, because we have knowledge of how that works too.
Thanks very much. Robert.
Thanks, Matt. Helen's actually answered most of my points, but so thanks, Helen. You beat me to it. It was really just touched on. I think we really need a strong project management team, and I know there's a number of bids out there at the moment that are looking for collaborations and consortium and things, but they all lead to having that overriding one in the almost team individual. And I suppose what we're getting at is we work collaboratively, with the incumbent providers. We haven't even touched on advertising agencies that are obviously going to have a strong part to play, and that's another revenue stream for the local authority. So that's something that needs to be looked at, and the coverage of that agency as well. So yeah, that's it really.
Amanda, last one on this question.
Yeah, just a little bit to add, because I think there's a few people in this room interested in our procurement, our forthcoming procurement, which is taking longer than expected. We want to ensure that one of the things we want to achieve through this is to stimulate the market to deliver mobility hubs, kind of create a new opportunity where we can kind of deliver everything for one. So we're expecting that might come through a consortium, or perhaps as so that we have the contact with one lead supplier. But as Rob said, having that kind of project management, someone that's going to take that oversight for the delivery of all of the supply of the components, the delivery of them, the maintenance, kind of ongoing operation of some of those hubs as well. The challenges that we have kind of been facing is where there's existing, like some of those roles are currently done by the local authorities, but they're different in each of the ones that we're working with. So kind of really trying to tighten that up at the moment to work out who is going to do what is a bit of a challenge that we face. So other combined authorities may face this as well, but we are getting there. So. Great,
thanks very much. I've got a question which is thinking about the mobility hubs in the context of urban or versus rural environments, and whether we've had much thinking about the differences there. I think if we can also, I think another question I saw earlier was also that we talk about urban and rural, but actually there's a lot of people who neither live in urban or rural. They kind of live in the kind of suburban. So I wonder if there's any thoughts about either people who've worked on places for mobility hubs that maybe aren't in urban cores or on the edge of centre, or include rural environments, and any sort of experience that we might be able to draw on from there. Robert first.
Well, I suppose I could just touch on the work we just did at Partick and where we've spoken about there. So Partick there now is, whilst might not be truly rural. It is in the outskirts of the city of Glasgow. So it is that connection. It's where people would drive originally to Glasgow into the city centre and park. They're now driving to this hub. They're then getting they've got options to cycle, they've got options to take the underground, or they've got options to get a train to go into the city centre. So that's probably that's the best use case we've got. And you can see the actual spend and the on the infrastructure. It's £2.5 million infrastructure. It's a huge piece of infrastructure, yeah, it's proving worthwhile.
Great, thank you. I think Paul's hand was next, and then I'll go to Gustav.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We come up against quite a lot. I mean, a lot of the schemes that we're advising on, the sorts of garden village types, are in semi-rural areas, and the key thing there, and in order to justify the sorts of modal shares that we're pursuing at the planning stages, is to ensure, I showed that slide before, on the site, it's really about getting everybody to the primary hub as easily as possible. And it's from the primary hub, that's where then the bus services or the DRT services then connects the residents with the nearest town centre or local centre, which may well have a railway station or onward bus connections. So it's within that's within our power to make the connection with the nearest sort of mass transit services.
Thanks very much. Let's go to Gustav next.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot address this from a practitioner perspective, but from what we've learned is I think the purpose of the hubs just changes from the inner city center to the rural context. So in the rural context, I think that first last mile connection to get people to this major transport corridors is more important, whereas in the city center you have these short trips that you can maybe do with an e-scooter or an e-bike, and then in the suburban environment you have kind of a bit of both. You have that first last mile and you have also short trips. So I think it's just maybe the composition of the hubs that is changing a bit along with its purpose.
Thanks very much. Helen, do you have a question?
Yep, just a couple of quick points. So building on what Paul was saying, I think, this is what we're seeing in Cranbrook, which is this new town that's being built, as I mentioned earlier, just outside Exeter, that there's a train station for Cranbrook. And what we're seeing with our bikes is having bike stations situated around Cranbrook. And as it grows, adding more bike stations, they're going to be the enabler to bring people to the train station, where we've got a sort of a super hub of 20 bike stations, because that train station is only going to grow in busyness. So it's really kind of future-proofing and making sure those services are in there already, and they'll be able to connect in as the town continues to grow. I think truly rural mobility hubs are always going to be a bit of a challenge. We know that we've got interest in several locations, and it's the utilization, it's being able to make those hubs actually pay from an operator point of view. And I kind of starting to view it as you would almost with a subsidized bus service, that there are services that have a social value, but in order to be able to provide them, there needs to be some local authority support to make them happen. And I wonder if we're going to start seeing that model more with some of the more rural locations, where actually, yes, there is a social need to deliver those services, but from an operator point of view, there needs to be a level of subsidy to make that happen.
That's a very good point. So I think, as with all these sessions, we answer some questions, we provide examples of what we're doing now. And I think I've been involved in these sessions for many years now through the Como conferences, and it's great that we're now seeing actual examples of things on the ground, which is really good. We're starting to learn about the users. We're starting to learn about what works. We're also learning that it's not always as easy to take a vision on a piece of paper and put it on a piece of land that already has existing services. So that's a challenge. But I think I'd like to sort of thank the audience, on behalf of the audience, all of our speakers today. I think it's been very interesting. I think that there's a lot more to do in this area. There are many questions we didn't get to, so apologies for those. But I'd just like to let you know that the next session, which will be starting in about an hour's time, is a session on inclusive and shared transport. Also, don't forget that tomorrow evening there are some post-conference drinks in both London and Edinburgh, so you can sign up for those. On behalf of all of the speakers from today, I've been Matthew Clark. I very much enjoyed sharing the session and hope to speak to you and see you all again soon. Thanks very much.